Namaste. Coming straight to the subject, first of all, is there a relation between happiness and health? Well, there is, and there is enough evidence to show us that when we are in a state of depression, then basically all the systems, all the functions, including the immune system, which is so crucial and critical to maintenance of health in various levels, is depressed. On the other hand, when there is a state of joy, inner peace, a state of inner felicity, if I may say so, everything works smoothly and functions, beautifully, harmoniously. It is as if it is a key to monitor ourselves. The one-step way to understand whether we are, the one-step way to understand, look at whether we are actually healthy or not is when people come into my office. I just see whether they are smiling or not. If they are smiling, there is hope, to put it this way. And the second aspect is will and faith. If will and faith are diminished in a human being, we can almost say that he is taken a downhill course. And if will and faith are alive and awake, as they say that that's what is important, crucial to recovery. So then, there is hope. So basically, one of the things that a physician does is to rekindle will and faith and hope in a human being, which then starts automatically triggering the processes that heal. Essentially, the body heals itself, but the body heals when it is convinced that it can be healed. So that's the important part. So healing takes place in a matrix wherein the doctor, the patient, and the milieu, the atmosphere, everything is important. So it's so important that not only my own happiness and health, but of everybody around. So that's why the great Upanishadic saying, Sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve santu niramaya. So it's not enough that I am happy, but may all be happy with the true happiness. So this is the one aspect, that if a society, if people around me, they are in a state of depression, unhappy, then those vibrations, those things are automatically affecting me. And therefore it's so important that the milieu in which I live and breathe, the atmosphere that surrounds me should be such that we breathe happiness. So then comes the next step, that how really to breathe a happiness. Well, very simply we can say that if we go by the Upanishadic thought, that delight is the origin of creation. If the origin of creation is delight, then at the end point we see just is very opposite. The more we narrow down creation into smallness of form, smallness of consciousness, delight begins to as if escape on all sides, and what is left is a little bit of pleasure and pain. So there is the Ashwath tree where the whole creation moves from above below. Toward the end, we find nothing else but a little point of joy which sustains creation. But much of it is lost. And the whole journey of evolution of life is to recover this joy. So this joy is implicit in creation. We see it in mountains, we see it in rivers, we see it all over. That's why when we go there, we reconnect with a vaster joy. One of the ways to find joy is simply to enter into a vast image, because joy is inbuilt within creation. In fact, it's one thing that sustains. In the Rig Veda, there is the story that Soma goes and starts, the recovery process starts. He brings back the bride of Brahman back to the Brahman himself. But shortage of time, we'll not go into that story. But basically, delight runs in the fabric of creation. All around, look at the stars. You'll see that delight. Look at the way the waves see. The ocean is rolling itself. Look at even creation through a vast passage of time. And one is compelled to see the play of delight. Look at even the forest, then life comes, the trees, the animals, all of them, when we see their play, their gambol, then there is a state of joy which is, again, we find in these creatures, early living creatures. But with man, something happens, and we seem to have lost that spontaneous delight, and that's because the story, if we read of Bible, Adam and Eve, that we tasted the fruit of knowledge. So we tasted the apple, and and the apple kept the doctor away, the healer away. So basically what it means is that in creation there is unconscious delight which is there. I mean, delight is there, but the creature is not conscious of it. But now we have to recover it consciously through conscious knowledge. And that's where yoga steps in, that we have to recover that lost delight. And there have been so many ways that human beings have tried to contact delight. It's more the most narrowest way is by trying to find joy in something external. But the problem with that is, if we try one little happiness, we get two sorrows free. And that sorrows free is actually grace, because it reminds us of the limitation of what we are experiencing. So the search continues, and then we try to seek it in family, friends, and everybody who is around. But again, the same thing happens, because we get momentarily joy, but again it's followed by sorrow, because when desire clutches at an object, it clutches the object for the sake of the object, and not for the sake of what it really represents, the divine element within it. So the objects, the things which form and name, they tend to, of course, pass away with time. It's a very simple thing we all experience in life, that if we love somebody for the sake of love, because one wants to love and one connects with the core of love, then the love remains. But if it is one loves for the sake of the form, something external, then this love tends to dwindle away. Now, delight, love, harmony, they are very close allies in creation. So we have to recover this delight. And how do we recover it? We recover it by the same process that we lost it. So ordinarily, all creation is rushing from within outward, from above downwards. That's why, as the Upanishad puts, that through the gates of the senses we rush outside. Now we have to turn it inward and discover the very source. So basically, with anything in life, if we go back to its source, this source is only one. There are no two sources. We may call it by 100 names, but there's only one source. And that's where yoga steps in. Yoga literally is union with the divine. We may use the word divine, we may call the word source, origin. Doesn't matter what term we use. That, truth, Tao, it's all the same, but basically it's to reconnect with the source. Now what happens when we reconnect with the source? Then we experience the purest form of delight. And for that, one of the simple things is that because we are constantly concentrated upon the ego self, on a very narrow personality and narrow fringe of experiences, therefore we live in a state of perpetual misery, because the narrower we become, the less we'll experience joy in life. This is very interesting that, we can make a little observation ourselves. All of us can make it, and I'm sure we are aware. One of the things that happens in depression is that, nobody understands me. I'm in this state, I'm in that state, I have negative thoughts, I have negative... The common element in all this is I. And when, a person sees simple things which can help us step out of this ego zone, really helps. It's amazing. It could be a dog, it could be a cow, it could be simply window shopping. Just stepping out of this zone, simply loving the family, loving the child, it tends to bring us out of this ego zone. At least this narrow, extremely narrow zone of the ego. So the moment we step out of the boundaries of the ego, and the best thing which helps us to step out of the boundaries of the ego is love. There is no force more powerful than love, which helps us to step out of this littleness. And if we can love anything, anyone, it could be trees, it could be plants, it could be anything which is, other than me, even though we are loving it for the sake of me, yet there is an extension. So to start with, that's something very easily accessible to anyone. It's a common experience. I have known people who simply because, they were going through a state of depression, simply because they suddenly developed a lot of love for the child and love for even the family, they started emerging out of their state. Of course, family and children can be another source of depression, but that's a different story altogether, because this love is yet, governed by the ego principle. But then we can love something still large, love of humanity. There are people, even before we go into humanity, whether we believe in nationality or not, but a patriot who gives his life on the, trying to defend his country, not aggressing another country, but trying to defend his country, living for a larger ideal, nothing else, living for a larger ideal to, express something which is harmonious, beautiful in life. This itself liberates us from the little ego self. And then eventually we can go to something still greater, still wider, the highest formula, and that is what is given in the Isha Upanishad, to live for the divine in all. And this comes through this constant practice of meditating upon this idea that the divine is in all, the divine all is in the divine and the divine is all. And when we can live with that state of vastness, then spontaneously happiness comes, joy comes, love comes, and with joy, love, harmony, and peace, health returns. So we have this great formula given in the Isha Upanishad. Ishavasyamidam sarvam yadkicha jagatyam jagat tena taktena bhunjita magrita kasya suddhanam. So this whole world, this creation, forms, names, they are all meant for the habitation of the Lord. When we understand it, even in the slightest of motion, this is not to leave earth, but in every motion, every activity, every movement of creation is meant for the inhabitation. It's like a dance going on where the Lord is at the center and nature is dancing around him for the joy of the Lord. But problem is when we place ourselves at the center, then there is a problem because it's not the place we are meant to occupy. Unless we say that the self, the I of me and the I of the divine ultimately are one, but that's a whole process to arrive at that state. Not a conceptual state, but an experiential state. So once we understand that this world is not meant to satisfy my ego, it's not meant to fulfill my pleasures, my desires, but there is something like a larger plan, something much greater. And if I can connect with that thread which is going on in this creation, then life is beautiful. So what is that greater thread, greater link? And that greater link we cannot find if you look at life only on the surface and within a small frame. That greater link which we can see constantly going on in this world is change, and change with a direction and a purpose. And that change, if we look at the history of earth, it is nothing else but evolution, progress towards a greater and greater manifestation. So we have material world, then living world, then mentalized world, and this change is not going to stop here. And as Sri Aurobindo says that man is a transitional being, this change will take him further beyond the boundaries of the mind towards a spiritual and a supramental being. So that is the most perfect solution. Until then, we will be prone or succumb to certain things, disease, even death, but eventually that is the radical solution, the last remedy that man has to undertake. In any case, the evolution will carry him beyond this frontier. So when we look at life like that, then we understand that pain, illness, even death, they are a reminder that, look, the life we lead is still imperfect. And instead of abandoning this field in search of a pursuit of perfection above or within, we need to strive, following the current of nature, the thread through which everything is moving, toward the evolutionary manifestation of the divine within us in every aspect, every act, in our very body, in the very body cells, as the mother says, the divine consciousness, the divine energy should infiltrate us. And if we can do that, then life would grow beautiful, health and harmony will become natural and spontaneous. So this is the essential plan. So to connect with the greater plan of life, the smaller we become, the lesser the frame in which we live, we will be unhappy and miserable, whatever we may do. And the more unhappy and miserable we are, life will, the seeds of illness will take one form or the other. It may be physical illness, it could be psychological illness, social illness. So the solution that has always been proposed is to discover that vastness, that truth which is supreme harmony, as the Vedic rishis put it, that truth which is delight, raso vaisaha, within and in the world around. How does it help people around? Well, it naturally helps because when an individual becomes a vessel of this joy, this delight, it spontaneously radiates and transmits all around. I mean, we believe, unfortunately, that we are very closed boxes, closed containers. What's happening in my body has no effect upon others, is my body. But well, each of us is having an effect upon the world around. So let me put it a bit paradoxically. It's not only stars that influence our lives, but we also influence the stars. So we influence the cosmos because we carry the cosmos within us. So, within the pind there is the Brahman. That is the whole truth that is revealed to us by the Upanishads. So let's live in this vastness. Let's live in this sense of the all. And this sense of the all and vastness comes not by any mental, intellectual conception. That could be a starting point. But by simply living and meditating upon the divine within us, the divine who is within this creation, and the divine who is the very substance of everything. Very beautifully, one of the Upanishads puts it, the self of our self, the life of our life, the mind of a mind. So essentially, in this evolutionary journey, we have reached to this point where we have become mental beings. Now, this mental software needs to be upgraded to the spiritual software. We are facing this evolutionary crisis. So we see an emergence of a large number of diseases. We have lost the spontaneous harmony of the early human race, where there was a kind of very nice, a kind of working harmony with nature. But we have lost it because mind by its nature tends to specialize, and to specialize it needs to narrow down its concentration onto whatever it's studying. So in the process we have lost that spontaneous harmony. Now we have to regain it consciously, and the way to regain is to go beyond the mind into higher realms of consciousness and allow this higher consciousness to influence and change our mind and life and body. It's first key that we have to access this higher consciousness. There are two keys, of course. One is in the center of the heart, and the other is, the mind and above the mind, head and above the mind. By concentrating on these, on the divine presence within, we come out of this little narrow frame, this vessel in which we are enclosed. And we discover a very beautiful discovery. These are things which have to be discovered, of course, that there is a heart behind our heart, an emotional being which is not these surface emotions. Surface emotions are all the time going through pleasure and pain, happiness and sorrow, love and hate. But there is a heart within our heart which can love truly. It's the deeper heart. There is a life within our life, and surface life is going through all the contacts and touches of nature, but there is a deeper string of life, the other lifeline that runs behind as a rejuvenating stream, and we need to connect with it. And there are several processes for that. There is a mind behind our mind. The surface mind is all the time busy with data and surface information, but this mind has a much more direct access to knowledge. And of course, there is ultimately we discover that there is a body behind the body, like the original blueprint of the body. And actually, it is this body, this subtle physical body in us, which corrects the imbalances of the physical body, because there is in it the original plan. So the physical body, the gross body, tends to automatically respond to this original blueprint which is already there. All that is needed is to activate these things. To activate these things, there have been so many processes which Indian mystics and mystics all over, but primarily this knowledge has been preserved in India, have found ways and means to discover this inner life. And behind this inner life, an inmost life, the life of the soul within us. The soul is not just a conception, not just an, atom or a, piece of information, but it's a real living entity. It is us in the truest sense of the word. And if we allow this to step forward, life can become not only beautiful and harmonious, but full of love and sweetness and a charm that endures all the rub and change of time. And the other is through the head. If we can concentrate, and eventually if this lid also opens, then we will become spontaneously the rivers which the Vedic Rishi spoke of, the rivers of peace and light and joy, all of them, wideness, they are aspects of the higher consciousness, and they begin to descend in a human being. And as they descend, they lend to the mind a wideness, a knowledge which goes beyond the scope of our limited mental intelligence. To the heart, they free it from the little narrow cabins in which it is closed. It suffers, struggles, cries and weeps, and is momentarily happy, is swinging between pleasure and pain. It liberates the life, this higher consciousness, from its small little efforts in which all its energies are locked, and gives to the will a greater direction and purpose, and to the body itself it gives it the rejuvenating capacity and capacity to spontaneously heal itself. So this is the broad plan in a very, very quick compressed way. I've tried to give the whole thing. If there are any questions, you're most welcome. Yes.
We will take one question which is directed to Dr. Alok Pandey. Mr. Umesh Lalit asks, can you please say something about All Life is Yoga by Sri Aurobindo?
Okay, yes. It's a question that includes the whole universe. So essentially, the specialized yogic practices at some point of time, by the very fact of their specialization, began to cut themselves off from the mainstream of life. This was not in the original days when yoga is born, Vedic yoga, where life was integrated with yoga. But over a period of time, the Upanishads with the meditative stress on meditative practices, and then eventually the whole stress came on, meditation and these practices, wherein we broke into other dimensions, the spiritual dimension and so on and so forth. But how to integrate that dimension with life? So that was the schism which we find in certain kind of thought. So people tried to bridge this schism in different ways. One was that lead a sattvic life, a more human life, but otherwise the real thing is yoga. So this life was regarded as a preparation for the life beyond. So moksha became the highest ideal, and a moksha which was like a post-mortem moksha. So meaning thereby, while in this life, do some good karma, serve humanity, take care of, be a good human being, and then do some practices, like say a couple of hours of meditation, and eventually this will deepen and take you into that break free from the human mold, and eventually you enter that state of spiritual perfection. So this tendency created an otherworldliness in human thought, and this is where, and it didn't make sense of life, of creation, of all that we are, of all that we have gone through in our journey, and all that we yet may become. So Sri Aurobindo fills this hiatus by saying that every aspect of life, from waking up to sleep and all that happens in between, from life to death and all that happens, rebirth and all that happens in between, our speaking, our silence, our food, sleep, everything can and must become yoga. Yoga, thereby union with the divine. Yoga in Sri Aurobindo's, we can have specialized practices, but as we all know, it's very difficult for an average humanity to set aside 2 hours for specialized practices. People can do it, it's nice. But even then, it doesn't solve the real riddle, because, okay, I do my specialized practices, I sit in meditation, do some deep breathing exercise, and it helps me, no doubt about it. But what about the rest of the day and my dealings, my life, wherein there is marriage, there is children, there is meeting people, there are seminars, conferences, there is eating, there is also, sitting together. So, first time we find hints of this integration, of course, after the Vedas are lost or are reduced to just meditative practices. We see it in Tantras and we see it in the Gita. And Sri Aurobindo takes it still further, that every aspect of life must be suffused through and through with yoga. This is the first meaning of all life is yoga. Second is that if we look at life, we see this evolutionary emergence, and Sri Aurobindo says that this is because there is a secret yoga going on in nature. What it means is that there is the divine presence hidden in nature, and the divine presence is bringing out the various possibilities that are involved in nature. Like from a seed, the tree develops. So there are steps and stages. You can freeze at any step a tree and say, well, this is the ultimate possibility. But then if we wait and allow time to, carry on the evolutionary process, the tree will develop into its full-fledged possibility. So because there is a secret yoga going on in nature, meaning thereby nature is trying to bring out utmost divine possibilities which are hidden inside as a divine essence or a divine seed, through names and forms, it is trying to bring it out. And in this process, we see that there is a material universe, living universe, mentalized thinking man. They are part of that secret yoga. But it is unconscious or subconscious. The creature is not aware that this is how this is happening. He just knows that, we know that evolution happens, there are crises, and somehow or the other we find ways and means to adapt ourselves, and eventually there is evolution. But actually this is subconscious yoga, wherein latent, submerged possibilities are emerging. So Sri Aurobindo says that this subconscious yoga, which is going on in nature, which anyways will go on, regardless of man, till ultimately the divine consummation through material creation, the union of matter with spirit, which is what is symbolized in Shivlinga, that, there is the union of divine soul with the material principle. So this is what is the ultimate possibility that has been foreseen by the sages, that if body itself can unite with the divine, can become no more an unconscious or half-conscious clod, but it can become itself divine. So this is the possibility that Sri Aurobindo brings out. But for that, the subconscious yoga must become a conscious yoga. Meaning thereby, up till now, the emergence, evolutionary emergence has been subconscious. And each emergence means a modification of matter. So, mechanical, almost dead matter, or jad as it is called, becomes living matter. Why? Because the power of life emerges and thereby matter becomes alive. Then living matter becomes thinking matter. So, in the brain, we have all these things which, the gyri and the sulci and the neurons and the transmitters, all these processes are created so that thought can be transmitted through this machine called the brain. Now, this has to be carried further so that there could be the divinization of matter, meaning thereby the brain centers, the heart, all these organs have to undergo a change and modified so that they can become vehicles and channels and instruments of the divine consciousness. And for that, he gave, and naturally, it has to be connected with every sphere of life. Every sphere of life has to be divinized, not mentalized or right now as it is, purely driven by vital desires and vital impulses with a little bit of sattvic balance in life. So it has to be divinized. So, that is the process going on. And of course, there are step stages and everything that he has already revealed. That's a vast subject. But in this sense, all life is yoga. Right now, a subconscious yoga, because of which evolution happens. Man is that point of transition where the subconscious yoga can become conscious yoga. And by conscious yoga, we will cross that passage. Man is a transitional being. He is to be surpassed by another being, like man himself has surpassed the animals, the chimp. So man will be surpassed into a greater becoming or a greater being, if you want to put it, who will be much more closer to the divine in both his essence as well as his consciousness and the very body. Through a progressive modification. So we have to become conscious bridges between what creation has been up till now and what it yet can become. So in that sense, it becomes a conscious yoga. Yes.
Thank you so much, sir. I hope it answers Mr. Udit's question and everybody else's question. Thank you for such a detailed and elaborative answer, sir. I know there can be one whole session to explain Sri Aurobindo's All Life is Yoga's philosophy, but you managed to somehow explain it in simple terms. So thank you, sir.